Oh yes, we are. We're live. Hello, everyone. Hi there. Hello, Conrad. Hello, Kate. Hello, Charlotte. And thanks to any nutcases that are actually watching us. First of all, get a life. It's pathetic. It's Friday night. You're not dead yet. Get out. And if you are, I hope you've got something nice to drink or eat. This will go on. Well, it'll drag on for about an hour. And then, thank God, it'll be over in time to watch Gardener's World. So that's the very good news. Okay. So you're stuck with the 4 hours. Now, the first thing I have to say is that we are all, of course, pretending to be either L, G or B, because nobody who is actually L or G or B is associated in any way with LGB Alliance. And I just want to set that out at the beginning.
Quite right.
We have 4 of us here tonight who will do a reasonable facsimile of being either L or G or B. So what I'm going to do, I thought I would kick off with a wee question, and I'll go round everybody and we'll see what folks say. So what was your life circumstances? Where were you living? What age were you when you first said the words, I think I am lesbian or gay or bisexual, whatever it was? So I'm going to go to Kate Barker first. Kate, what age were you? What was your living situation when you first said those words?
Well, I was 16, but I had a girlfriend for some time before that. I think I just hadn't come up with the words to describe it because, I grew up in a really small town. I think I was very young for my age. I didn't know any lesbians apart from this one girl that I'd found. But it was the same for all of us, I think, wasn't it? It was just, there was no representation on TV. I mean, nowadays you can't turn on a Sunday night drama without there being some lesbian action. But then there was just absolutely nothing. So I think it took me probably 6 months to realise between having a girlfriend and actually saying, oh God, I think I'm a lesbian. I'm a slow learner, maybe.
So presumably you were still living with your parents?
Yeah, I was, and my I had to come out to them, but not voluntarily, because I'd been to Wimbledon for the day, and I remember it was on a school trip, and I'd seen Billie Jean King actually, so all the stars were aligned. I'd gone back to this girlfriend's house, and her father had come home unexpectedly. So it wasn't a voluntary, outing. So there was a lot of hoo-ha. There were lots of parents phoning each other and everybody being aghast. But I think I remember about it most was my mum. And my parents were fine about it, but my mum said to me, "Oh, do you know, it's just not a very happy life. I'm very worried for you." And that really, being 16 and not knowing any better, I thought that was true. I thought that was it. It was not going to be a very happy life.
Yeah, okay. Conrad, I'll come to you. What age were you? What was your living situation and so on?
I mean, there are two coming outs, aren't there? There's the coming out to yourself and coming out to anyone else. And coming out to myself was sort of, I was in New York. I was 18. I'd done my A-levels in England, and I'd gone to New York to travel around the East Coast a bit with my dad. And he'd left me alone in New York for a few days, staying with a friend of his. And it had been percolating. I hadn't done anything, except at a party earlier in the summer. I'd ended up sort of having frottage with a bloke. Late at night.
Yeah, would you care to explain that for any uninitiated persons or not well read people?
Clothes.
Some kind of fancy ice cream, is it? Or
no, it's not. Frottage au lait. It's no.
Yes.
Clothes remained on. There was a little bit of rubbing. Nothing actually happened, but I realised, and this was with another man, obviously, and I realised.
And we're not talking about brass or anything. I mean, it wasn't a cultural exchange, no.
No, it was a party in Cambridgeshire, and anyway, so it was percolating, and obviously I'd actually been really suppressing this whole subject area, even though I grew up in a very liberal environment in London. And I was in New York, and I went on a walk through Central Park to the Guggenheim Museum. And if you know the Guggenheim Museum, the museum actually goes up in a spiral and then comes down in a spiral.
Yeah.
And I remember the weight hanging on me, this anxiety of having to accept that I was gay. And I walked up the spiral to the top of the Guggenheim, and then I started walking down, and I thought, it just means, because in those days, it just means we have kids. And actually, when you're 18, you don't want kids.
Yeah.
One of the issues, you know, people consenting to losing their fertility at that age. And I thought, well, and I walked back through Central Park to where I was staying, and I just thought, well, that's it. I'm gay, and I'm just not going to have kids, and that's the end of the world. So I was on holiday, if you like, and about to, you know, enter the world of university. I was about to have a gap year, actually, but that was the moment I realised to myself. Now, that wasn't the moment I realised to anyone else, because actually, then weird thing happened, which is that I went back to New York for the gap year, and I fell in love with a woman.
Is that not just like the thing? Imagine.
It was. I hadn't done anything. Having decided I was gay, I didn't think, oh God, let's go and get myself some sex. I basically went back to England, did my Oxbridge exams, didn't get into Oxford, worked in Crank, which is a vegetarian restaurant. I went back to New York for my gap year, and there I met this woman who was 13 years older than me, and I fell in love with her. And maybe you'd say, well, that was my last desperate attempt to, if you like, to remain in the closet or to deny my sexuality. But it was love. And actually, given that that was 1983 in New York, I wouldn't be alive today if I hadn't met her, because it was before we all knew about what was happening with HIV, and it was a sort of free-for-all. Sexually, people were approaching me the whole time. And I just know that I wouldn't have survived. So in a way, she's like this sort of, even though it was perhaps unhealthy from a being true to yourself perspective, it saved me, having an affair with a woman.
Well, having an affair with women has probably saved us all, Conrad. But anyway, Charlotte, what about you? What's your sort of story of these days?
Well, Rhona, obviously I'm not going to disagree with you saying that having an affair with a woman is going to save us all. But it's really fun actually going third, because me and Kate and Conrad haven't had these conversations before, and actually Kate said that was the whole thing. We don't know our coming out story, and it was really interesting, because I was 16 and I remember having these huge crushes on girls at school, and I'd done my reading and I thought, nothing to worry about here. This is quite normal, Charlotte. Don't worry. And then I remember being in sixth form, in the lower sixth, so that's year 12, and somebody in the upper sixth, now called year 13, walked into the sixth form common room, and I was aware that I thought she was great, but I convinced myself it's because she really reminded me of my older sister. She walked into the room, and my mouth went dry, my pulse started racing. I thought everyone would be able to see what I was thinking and feeling. I thought I was going to faint. I had to go back to my room, and I sat down, and I thought, my study room, and I thought, this is not normal. Perhaps I am and I couldn't complete the sentence in my own head. So I think I really, really identify with Conrad's, there's the coming out to yourself and the coming out to others thing. So that's when the idea first formed in my head. But here's the thing. I wasn't a shaven-headed, fat, boiler-suited, wearing dyke. So that clearly meant I wasn't a lesbian, surely. And this is the thing, because, you know, Kate, you say you think you're a slow learner. Well, it took me another 8 years before I actually, 6 years before I actually acted on it. So I think you were pretty much ahead of the curve. So don't be too tough on yourself. But this whole thing of it's not going to be a happy life. You talk about representation on TV, and you talked about Billie Jean. It's really interesting because at that time, so I was a very, very sporty girl. And that's another interesting thing about where you find your community. So hugely sporty, playing every sport. I, from the age of 12, had started watching Martina on TV, that great contest between her and Chris Evert. So this was a sporting icon for so many people, but so many young girls like us. Here was a girl, here was a woman who was athletic, muscular, aggressive in play. I thought she was fantastic. It made it okay to be overtly competitive in sport, which I have always been. So she was fantastic. I think she's great. And, you know, maybe one day I'll meet her and maybe one day I won't. But I mean, you know, she's continued to be an icon. But we had more in common, I think, than I realized at the time. But I just remember as a girl there, I didn't know any gay people. I don't remember hearing anything positive about being gay. I banished the thought. I buried it under rubble. And like Conrad, actually, I think that's the thing. Sexuality is on a spectrum. I've always got on very, very well with men. And men were attracted to me. And I had boyfriends, although Mummy famously said when I was young that I wasn't boy fond. I was always interested in reducing my times around the athletics track. But that was my coming out to myself moment. So that, to answer your question, Rhona, that's when I first realised it. And I buried it because it took until I went to university in the early 1980s for me to realise that there were others out there that would make that, and it was going to be okay. So that was the moment for me.
I think I didn't finish the because I basically said I came out to myself and then I went back into the closet effectively, and I then after my gap year went to Edinburgh. So it's university, I think, is probably quite a common thing. And while missing my girlfriend as she'd been, I met a gorgeous American, Black American literature student who, you know, we became really good friends. I didn't think anything, honestly. I was so in denial. It was completely ridiculous. And we went to London to stay at my house where I grew up for the weekend. We had a nice weekend. He slept in the next door room, our spare room. And then we got on the stagecoach. I mean, Brian Souter would be very proud of this. Basically, my first sexual experience with a man happened on a stagecoach. Thank you, Brian Souter. And on the overnight trip back to Edinburgh, I mean, it wasn't, you know, what you may call sex in the fullest possible sense, but it was, and then I didn't look back after that. So that was.
So, are we talking about moving on from just frottage to the full 99 then, Conrad? Is that what we're saying?
It wasn't the full 99.
A plain ice cream. 99.
I mean, it was a sexual experience.
Sure.
I don't think our audience, if there is any on Friday night, want to hear details, but we sort of covered ourselves in our coats in the top deck of Brian Souter's. I just want to say
excellent. Excellent.
Stagecoach, and then I just had this idea, and this is 1983. But I realize now how unusual this was. That everyone was cool with this, and I didn't feel the need to come out to anybody. I just, this is my boyfriend, and I did that with everyone I knew at Edinburgh, and I didn't give them a chance to talk about it, which was probably a mistake. I didn't, and I compared my husband had the classic coming out to his parents and the drama that involved. I had a feeling that it's incredibly traumatic, but might be quite a useful process, because all I did was I internalized. I mean, I think I was probably quite a homophobic gay in those days. I sort of consider myself exceptional and different, and I'm not that sort of gay. And I, you know, but without having the coming out, I wasn't able to deal with my own homophobia. I think that's one of the things you do when you come out, is you confront your own homophobia. That's why it's so traumatic. And you confront other people's homophobia. You give them a chance to react, and you it's an incredibly important process. And I denied myself, and instead I had this sort of weird drip feed version of it, whereas the traumatic out thing didn't happen.
Okay. I suppose I should throw my own Tapmansworth in here as well. I was actually about 19 by the time I actually said the words. But usually when I'm talking about this, I talk about knowing from about the age of 9 that I was different. And I remember a dance troupe, a Soviet Russian, it would have been at the time, I think. Oh, I can't remember. Soviet dance troupe came to our local area, and a kid from each primary school, I don't know what you call it in England, I was 9, was chosen to go up and give flowers to the troupe and so on. and it was mine went to the prima ballerina, and she gave me a kiss on the no, I tell you, it was the male dancer. He gave me a kiss on the cheek, and afterwards people going, "Ooh, the male dancer kissed you." And I remember being incredibly disappointed that it wasn't the prima ballerina. I had missed her by one and had to give my flowers to the man. But having said that, I'm incredibly wary of ascribing any sexuality to children or very young people, far less a gender identity. But if we talk about sexuality first, because I'm aware that other people feel these things at that age, crushes and all the rest of it, and they either grow out of them or they don't, or they move in and out of feeling that way. But at the age of 13, I became an evangelical Christian, and then a charismatic Christian with the whole speaking in tongues and all that kind of carry on. So I was so guilt-ridden by that. And when I did come out at 19, I had a short affair with a woman. First of all, I lived in the nurses' home when I came out, and that was just like a big bloody playground if you were a lesbian. But anyway, it didn't go well for me because, and I'm going to come on and ask others about this, but because I was in that, and I suppose you would call it right wing, although not in the American sense. It was evangelical Christian setting, and I lost all of my friends, and eventually was thrown out of the house I was living in and so on because I was lesbian, and this was just too much. I was also exorcised. I was held down and exorcised of the spirit of homosexuality, and just in good biblical terms, it came back sevenfold. So that was all very jolly. But I wanted to go on and ask about that because at the age we are, still now for a lot of people, but at the age we are, religion probably played a significant part in most people's lives who are now in their probably 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever. So was it like that for any of you? And I'll start with you this time, Charlotte. Was religion or any of that kind of pressure a part of your life? Or perhaps it still is?
I think that's a really such an interesting question, Rhona. So when I eventually did have my first sexual experience with a woman, which is when I was 22, I woke up the morning after the night before and thought, that was it. That was the missing piece of the jigsaw. It felt great. I felt no guilt because it felt so good and it felt right. And then we go into the whole thing of how the family reacted and how you put yourself in society. But the interesting thing is, reference to your question, I felt absolutely no guilt. I say that as a confirmed Christian. And it's really interesting. That's a kind of a bit of a Jeanette Winston story that you were just describing. And it's interesting. I'm also a conservative county councillor. Rhona, please don't reject me. Don't cut me off. So just as Clause 28 kept me out of the Conservative Party for a long time, although it didn't stop me in a way, and that's another discussion, being a conservative politically. So the church and its attitude towards same-sex relationships kept me out of the church for a long time. And I've not discussed this even with Kate or anyone else, but I do attend service and I do celebrate the Eucharist, and that matters to me. And it's interesting that I talk to friends who are committed Christians. And of course, the whole thing is you can have an interesting conversation about what you think your holy book says about love. Now, I feel absolutely profoundly that how we love, these are the strongest, most noble feelings that we will ever feel. They define us as human beings. And I can have a good conversation with devout Christians who, and I will say to them, God would not be so cruel as to give me this feeling, which I feel enhances my life and the life of those around me. So that's the interesting discussion you can have with people who are open to the discussion. I think there's a matter of faith, and then there's a matter of human structures that are built for all sorts of reasons of power and all the rest of it. But I think you raised a really interesting question, the notion of guilt, because I have never, from the first moment, felt a shred of guilt about what I feel. I have acknowledged that I have a different conversation to have with the world, including with my family, some of which was good, some of which was hard. But I think the matter of faith and sexuality is a real question for many people And we need to acknowledge that there are many people who are wrestling with this, because it's both is really significant in their lives.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, thank you very much. It's really interesting. Kate, what about you? Was there religion? Was there anything there for you?
I'm not religious at all, but I did go to Catholic school, so I've always had a bit of a penchant for a nun, because there was, there's something about the way they were unmarried. They were totally, they seemed to operate totally independently of. I'm sure I wasn't aware of the patriarchy when I was 6, but I kind of had a sense that things were not quite as good for girls as they were for boys. And I do remember feeling jealous because boys were we had to go to service a couple of times a week. And it was really boring, but the boys were allowed to be altar boys. So at least they got to go a bit earlier and dress up, and they could walk around in the service and sprinkle their waters and do all the things they did. So I think that was actually, along with looking at nuns and being quite fascinated by them, it did sort of introduce me to the idea of the difference between the sexes. And I think on reflection as well, a lot of priests of that generation were gay because if you were a man that didn't want to get married, it was a life choice for you. And actually, so I'm not religious at all, but I went to a sixth form college where it was also a Catholic college, just because that happened to be the nearest. And I recently read that the headmaster actually, after his death, was found to have been guilty of a lot of sexual a lot of the children. So it does seem to me that the church is kind of enmeshed with sexuality, and often in an extremely negative way.
Yeah.
But it do provide a really interesting portrait of people who didn't get married, and that's so I kind of didn't, but were fulfilled and were clever and interesting and were great teachers, and I was really interested in them. I think that's as far as it went, and I'm not religious at all now.
Yeah. Conrad, any guilt for you? Was there ever anything like that held you back, do you think?
No, quite the contrary. I mean, it's still, in a way, I come from the religion of atheism. I mean, I was brought up in the North London liberal, lefty sort of intelligentsia, where I just assumed, which is why I just assumed I didn't even have to announce my sexuality because there were no hurdles. But actually, what was interesting was to discover the extent of, if you like, conservatism, small c conservatism in my immediate family, not my siblings at all, who are brilliant. But I mean, I don't, she's still alive, and I don't want my mum to sort of mind. I'm not criticizing her. She's been, given she was born in 1936, she's been unbelievable mother in this respect. But her reaction was one of shock. And in fact, she said, I won't remember this, but she said, but why do you have to indulge your lust? Why don't you accept your responsibility to be married and have children? And as if sexuality in itself, anything, was just a sort of lust-driven thing that should be put aside for your. My father said something which Kate said she'd said to herself that I had, but which was, look, I know you, Conrad. I know you're going to be able to make the right choices for yourself, and you know what's right for you. I just, in my experience, gay people are very unhappy. And I worry for you in that respect. And indeed, in my childhood, we'd gone to, the family Christmas parties or Christmas parties of friends or parties, where summer parties were taken as a child, and there would be the two men in the corner, and they're queer or queer, as my mother would say.
Brilliant.
Q-U-H is how she and so it wasn't, I mean, despite the extraordinarily liberal, ostensibly liberal environment with no religion whatsoever, absolutely none of that, there was still
different pressures.
Conrad, was there a sense that I felt this slightly for myself, that you should feel guilty because you were not going to provide an heir. You know, you're not going to. Maybe I felt that more as a woman, that somehow I wasn't going to be doing my duty by the rest of the family. It was never said explicitly, but there was a kind of a sense that there would always be something lacking that wasn't quite, you know,
I think
right.
It was expressed. I didn't feel that myself, and because I have my brothers, my older brothers are triplets, so there were 3 men, sort of propagate. So I didn't feel any pressure in that respect. But as I said, my mother, I think, was very disappointed at the thought that I wouldn't have children. And in fact, in recent years, much to my surprise, my current husband and I do have a child, and it's been a source of great happiness to my mother to see me as a father. But I didn't feel the pressure on myself to do that. No, I didn't really feel. No.
Can I move us on a little bit then and talk about something that most people go through, although we may want to discuss the fact that it doesn't exist for young lesbians and young gay men so much now, but the scene and launching yourself into the scene, which was all discos and all the rest of it. I'm really interested in where people found their partners and how that all happened. So for me, I joined Lesbian Line in Glasgow. There's a counselling service that also ran the discos and so on, but I was never really greatly into it. So I very quickly started to organise things like sports clubs, hill walking, climbing, badminton, football, anything to do with sport for me. And that's where I tended to meet people. So what about other people? Where did you and how? Because of course there was no internet back in these days. Some people met through things like, I don't know, The Guardian or The List when that came out. But what about you? And I'll go to Charlotte this time. What about you, Charlotte? How did you meet people? How did you socialise in circles that made you comfortable?
Well, it's so Rhona, same for me, sport. So I think somebody could do a really interesting sociological study on lesbians and sport. No one's ever done that kind of intersection, because definitely there seemed to me, certainly in the 80s, as I was growing up through the 70s, 80s, you know, for me, it was all about, I wanted to play sport. And that's where I met other girls like me. I didn't know where else I might find them. And that's where I met my wife, Liz. So we've been together for over 20 years. We met through a hockey club. I played a lot of cricket. I met a lot of women, you know, friends through that. And that was my tribe. And I remember thinking at the time, I don't know where people meet people. And then I would go to the lesbian clubs. And that's another question, because they used to be there. I mean, I remember in the 90s and so on in London going to things like the Ace of Clubs, First Out, the Fridge, the Glass Bar, Euston. Yeah. They've all closed, you know, that's where we went to meet other women. So you know, basically we would go out, we'd go and play sport all day, and then we were going to play the sport anyway, you know, because we took our sport really seriously. But for some reason, that was a place where it was okay to be out, and certain clubs would have quite a high quotient, but that is where we met, and I would play the sport anyway. I remember thinking at the time, well, if you don't play sport, where do you meet other women like us? I don't know. And then we would go to these lesbian bars, and it seems that that avenue isn't so open to women. But that's where I found my tribe.
Conrad, what about you? Where did you find Ben?
I was so awful. I was a homophobic gay, and I didn't want to go anywhere near the gay society at university. And I heard about this. Well, I saw him, this beautiful man who was just beautifully dressed, and I'd heard that he was gay. People knew that he was gay, and I literally. He studied in the History of Art library in Edinburgh. We were at Edinburgh University together, and I literally went in and I draped myself across his desk in the most appallingly blatant way, and sort of offered myself to him. And he was my first boyfriend. This was after the one I told you about in the bus, and that lasted a month. And he became my first love, and was lasted 5 years. So and that started a series of serial monogamy I mean, it was interesting because as I said, I didn't announce, but I came down to London and I happened to grow up across the street, literally right opposite the street to Alan Bennett, who we all knew was gay, but had never actually talked about it. And I introduced my boyfriend, Paul, this man I'd sort of captured from the library, and on various holidays from university. And one time I was there and I came out of my front door and I saw Alan coming out of his front. I said, Conrad, I just want to ask you something. What is it? Why do you feel you have to have a boyfriend? And I said, what do you mean? I mean, I love him, mate. What is? Why don't you have a girlfriend and have boys on the side? And this was this, he's liberal North London, and it just shows you how, difficult it was for some new gay. But anyway, I didn't date, so I wasn't on the scene at all till much later in life. So I'll answer your question.
Yeah, interesting. Kate, what about you?
Well, I pretty much found my tribe in the pub, really. So not such a glamorous story, but I was at Liverpool University and I moved into a house. It was like a young one's house, an absolute dump. And I lived in the basement, and the 3 floors above were these gay guys who were the most fun, who were out every night. So I just used to trail along with them at first until I met some people. And then I kind of really embraced that, the kind of lesbians that Charlotte mentioned earlier, that short haired and, really that sort of butch lesbian scene. They are the most fun for, if you like drinking and going out and dancing, and, they do feel like a real tribe. And that's where I found them. And I would go clubbing either to a gay bar or to a gay club or a lesbian club every night of the week if I could, if I had the money. And it was completely hedonistic, really social, and just surrounded by people who were totally fearless. And I loved the Scousers anyway. And I would have stayed in Liverpool after university, but it was a huge recession and there were just no jobs. But it was just a wonderful, warm kind of welcome to what being a lesbian was like and what it could be like. And then when I moved down to London, I sort of transferred that here and went out a lot. I went to the Fridge as well, Charlotte. Do you remember there was once a month, there was an event at the Fridge? It must have been 1,000 women in there. It was called Venus Rising at the Fridge.
It was heaven, Kate, and I'm surprised we didn't bump into each other. It's a mystery we didn't meet.
Just amazing. And everyone used to look forward to that huge, 1,000 women together. It was a fabulous club night.
When did they go to the Fridge? Because it was Daisy Chain on Tuesday night, which was the gay night.
It was one Tuesday a month, and I remember it was quite early in the week, so it was difficult to get to work the next day.
Yeah, but we made the effort, Kate, didn't we?
We did make the effort, Charlotte, and it was absolutely fantastic. And it's like so sad that now there's nowhere to go.
You're right, Kate. It was a complete phenomenon. That place was thumping, pumping with 1,000 women. And I met a girlfriend there. Obviously, I don't talk about that too much.
I met several girlfriends there.
Well, I mean, it was just fantastic. It was total liberation, total and as you say, where is that space now for young lesbians to go to, or young gay men? I don't know what gay men are doing, but there's no place like that for lesbians.
Well, it was quite focused on. It was quite sexual as well. It wasn't. There was nothing.
When I was in my late 20s and early 30s.
Yeah, I mean, it was fabulous. It was just all young people, just really happy to meet other young people, and it was really freeing and liberating, and it was just wonderful. I feel like these days a lot of people are talking about sex, but not many people seem to be doing it. Not many young people. I think they're really missing out. It was great.
I think it'd be unfair.
It's an interesting point, because there was always that thing about, what is a lesbian bringing a second date, a U-Haul, with lesbians committing to each other too quickly. And I kind of think now that if I could go back I would have a lot more sex and commit a lot less quickly. Do you know what I mean? Because lesbians tend to go, I love you on the second date, and then you're together for 2 years. You think, oh, fuck, how did I get out of this? But I'm keeping a wee eye on the comments here. And I just want to mention something that somebody said in the comments there. They said we need to hear more working class coming out stories. Now, I don't know if they're maybe not familiar with Scottish accents, but you don't get much more working class than me. I'm pure Kunselhoos. So I am as working class as they come. But I just wanted to say that I was never aware of there being a division in lesbian circles. I mean, the discos that we organised, the sports clubs, were incredibly mixed. It was probably one of the most mixed social settings I ever went into. Nobody noticed or cared or commented. I wasn't aware that people only went out with people that were like them. It was a very mixing thing. But I don't know. I mean, Charlotte, you're clearly, I do apologise, but what people would probably describe as middle class from your background. Conrad, perhaps you as well, I'm not sure. Kate, I'm not sure about you.
I'm lower, very lower middle class, upper working class.
I don't know why you call me middle class, Rhona. I just can't imagine why you would say that.
Yeah.
Can I make
But you're right, and I agree with you.
No, I don't even think it applies anymore. I don't know what. I mean, I started out very working class. I'm now a homeowner with a master's degree. What does it mean? Sorry, Conrad, on you go.
No, I think it's a very good point that the person. Sorry, it's just the first. There are two things I want to say actually. One was that comment is very pertinent because the thing about being gay, as we all know, is by all counts, censuses, surveys, it's around 3.5% of the population. So 1 in 30, 1 in 33 people are gay. So your pool is absolutely tiny. And when you think about how straight people agonize over their choice of partner, I can't meet a man, I can't meet a woman, whatever. Just imagine what it's like, you know, when you're gay, you've got 1/30 of the pool they've got. And so class doesn't generally come into it. I mean, you know, the social pyramid is like that. You fish throughout the pyramid. If you're a snob and you're gay, then you're fucked, basically. The second thing I wanted to say, just coming back to the whole dating thing, and it's so interesting doing this with 3 lesbians, is that we're roughly the same. I think I'm older than all of you, actually, but the defining feature of dating in my generation, of course, was HIV. And in a period when there was no treatment, there was no cure. So that changed. And maybe that's why, I was so monogamous and so stuck with the first guy I met, who was gorgeous anyway. But, the idea of partying and dating and, at the time when it was terrifying, it was absolutely terrifying. I think obviously lesbians didn't have the same fear. I mean, it was absolutely, every time you got off with somebody, because we didn't know enough about it, you thought you might contract HIV. And, if you had oral sex, you thought, well, that's, and you dreaded the test. So that did affect, in my generation, the whole dating thing. See, thankfully, it isn't so much of a concern anymore. But.
Yeah. Can we move now maybe to talk about, because there's an awful lot, and especially if you read, I don't mean trashy, but, the one-handed lesbian literature, as you used to call them, one-hand readers, where it always, for the book, all folds open to the same page. I'm sure there's the equivalent in gay men's literature, but it's all a bit kind of hearts and flowers, and that night they were not separated and all that carry on. But I just want to ask on a serious note for a minute. I mean, there are bad relationships out there. Gay men, lesbian women are perhaps not quite as likely, but have a chance of being caught up in abusive relationships. And without digging too much into anything that's personal for you, does anyone have experience or a comment on that they would like to make? Because I think it's daft to pretend that just because we are lesbian or gay or bisexual, that people don't behave like that. There's a lot of damaged people out there. Anybody want to chip in with anything on that?
I think it's much more hidden in lesbian relationships. And when I was younger, I had a couple of friends who were in relationships where there was domestic violence between women. And I think there was a huge amount of shame around it because, the perception is that lesbians are so gentle and lovely and they're also, so nice to each other all the time. That's what's so great about being a lesbian. It's just, just wasn't the case. So it was really hard for people to be able to admit it. But the other thing was, and it's what you said, Rhona, lesbians really commit quickly before they know somebody very well. They really do. And I know it's a cliche, but they're very much more likely to say, right, we're going to live together, we're going to join forces, we're going to join our finances. And then before you know it, you're absolutely stuck. So I think that there is an undercurrent of that goes on in, or used to go on in lesbian relationships. I don't know if it's the same now. It's an overcommitment, really.
Statistics bear that point out, because I think there are far more divorces amongst lesbian couples than there are amongst gay couples since civil partnership started.
I would agree with that too. I think Kate's and Conrad are absolutely right. And I agree. I started naively thinking women don't hit other women. And then I realized that people did. I'm pleased that I have never been in an abusive relationship, but I have observed it. And the abuse can be not just violent, but very controlling and manipulative. And I was really shocked when I realized that this happened. So people are people wherever you go.
Yeah.
So I think it is it's an issue for people everywhere. I remember once being with somebody, and it was short-lived, but the tendency to precipitate an argument escalated over time. It was short-lived. It was only about 14 months. So it started off all absolutely lovely. And then every 3 days, it was like there was some, boil that had to be lanced, and it was an argument, and it would end up with things being thrown around. Never my things, never her things, only my things. And it didn't take me that long to work out that correlation. And fortunately, I've been brought up in a family environment which said that, if people are close to you, they don't treat you badly. But I can easily see how people, if they've had difficult family relationships, will put up that sort of stuff. But, then I just pulled it, But it was as close as I ever hoped to get to that.
Well, you're muted, Rhona.
Sorry, I was just saying, I was having a bit of a wry grin to myself there at the idea that for Charlotte, for you, 14 months was a short relationship. That was practically eternity when I was in my 20s.
I think I've just reinforced the whole sort of image there, haven't I?
Yeah.
Let's really think about it.
So what about getting into wider culture that affected you as a lesbian or a gay man younger? I see that Kate and Charlotte are both posing beautifully in front of their book collections. I have a huge book collection, but I'm just not as pretentious as you two. So what about those aspects? Where did you find strength, perhaps in literature or films, even if it wasn't in overt lesbian or gay characters? I mean, we all, Cagney and Lacey and all this kind of carry on, but Kate, on you go.
Well, I once, then this was when I was about 15 and just kind of realizing, that something was definitely up. There was a film called Richard's Things, and it had Liv Ullmann and Amanda Redman, which I've still got a crush on Amanda Redman. And it was all very, very sort of, nothing ever happened in this film, but there was a lot of erotic charge about these two women that met. And there were a couple of scenes. There was one scene in particular where one of them dropped something and they almost go to kiss. And it's like long, lingering looks. But I had that, you remember we had a Betamax video recorder, and I played that bit of tape so often that it just disappeared into a blizzard of static. And, I watched it so many times that I couldn't watch it anymore. I think that sort of shows how little representation there was, but also how easily pleased I was. Just the suggestion of that they were going to kiss, but it was the emotional charge more than the idea of the sex or anything like that. And I could absolutely still picture that scene like 40 years later.
Conrad, what about you?
I absolutely. When I was in Edinburgh, so in 1985, I think My Beautiful Laundrette came out, which is, if you watch it now, it's probably one of the most awful films. I mean, it's so bad. But it absolutely, I mean, the scene where they kiss and have sex in the laundrette, Daniel Day-Lewis and the Indian guy. I mean, I just was completely overwhelmed. I'd never seen representation of gay love, gay sex, really like that. it was completely groundbreaking and deserves all the prominence it got because of that, even though when you watch it now you think, Christ, how on earth did this film do so well? It's pretty unwatchable, but it was really seminal for me. I tried to pretend to be a journalist and get an interview with Daniel Day-Lewis. I was just completely obsessed, and I think that's something people there are far more representations of gay characters now. Thankfully, it's great. Obviously we live in a straight world, and so most fiction and most art is about straight people. And, it's fantastic when you find it. And of course, we all devoured the classics in literature. Morris, the M. Forster novel that did feature gay stories. So few of them. They were fantastic. I found them.
I'm just seeing someone in the comments. There's a lot of stuff about bookshops and so on, and that's absolutely right. And someone mentioned Gaze the Word. My partner was actually the manager of Gaze the Word, and she also works in Silver Moon, so she's probably met most of the people that are commenting on bookshops there. Charlotte, what about you and culture? Are you just totally uncultured?
Well, yes. Well, I wouldn't call myself uncultured. I don't wish to claim any special knowledge. But yes, I'm an avid reader. And it's interesting you mentioned Silver Moon. Conrad, I completely agree with you. I think those of us who are looking to find some sort of explanation for our strange sort of sense of misplacement in the world, there's this party going on that everyone else seems to have been invited to when we're young, and except us. So we go looking. And of course, literature and art and music are so powerful. I remember reading, as I'm sure Kate did, as sure Rhona did, Radcliffe Hall's The Well of Loneliness, this sort of first sort of notion of this sort of, this sort of strange person that was this sort of third sex. It's actually in many ways quite sad, but some of it's, but it was, it's that whole, you'll never have a happy life. But then I was reading Virginia Woolf. I did English A-level. And I remember reading To the Lighthouse and then moving on to reading Orlando and everything and I read Orlando about this character who goes through time and is male and female and loves both men and women, whilst both man and woman. And I thought, yes, this is the person who's speaking for me. And then of course Jeanette Winterson comes along, and in a little way, as Oasis sort of picked up the baton from the Beatles. So Jeanette Winterson picks up that baton from Virginia Woolf. It was a continuation. So I just devoured that literature. And in terms of music, and there's loads of art as well, but in terms of music, when I came out in the early mid-1980s, this was when the Bronski Beat First and the Communards, and of course, Jimmy Somerville and Richard Coles and the rest will have known what they were doing. But we're going down and doing our dancing for the first time ever. People are singing about us. It's hard to explain, I think, to the previous generations what that felt like when things were so repressed. You never heard anything good about being gay. And suddenly we're there in the mosh pit, and it's not just okay, it's fun, it's joyful. I just think about it. And now my mid-20s niece has this whole playlist of 1980s music. She's playing all this stuff saying, this is what we're listening to now, Shah. And she's saying, what was it like for you? And she's listening to my stories, and she's heterosexual, but she just thinks it's great because she's looking at me, and suddenly, as I am now, her 60-year-old auntie is suddenly that young person again, finding liberation. So I think music, the arts are so important. And let's not forget how naive these times were. We all looked at Boy George on Culture Club, and we were all saying, oh, goodness me, is it a boy or is it a girl? Even we were saying that. So this whole gender bending thing, androgyny as we called it then, Annie Lennox, the Eurythmics, she's the only woman of her age who looks good with a shaved head as far as she still rocks it. She looks great. But, there she was with her suit and tie, Boy George with all his makeup and all the rest. And you look back at the music videos of the 1980s, even Tony Hadley's got his eyeliner, looks great, David Bowie. It was such an exciting time to come out. And I think I would love young lesbians and gay men to feel that sort of excitement that we felt then. And I'm not sure that that's there for them. And I'd like them to have that.
I think, I've got a gay niece and her partner, another niece, who are both under the age of 30. And I hear them talking about actually how much things are regressing, and I know this is a big thing for a lot of us now, in that it's not really cool. It was, we had it until about maybe 2012 when it was became quite cool to be gay, you know. After about 2020, I think we had about 12 years where it was okay, and then somehow it's become not that cool to be same-sex attracted again. But I wanted just to mention, since we're talking about all that, I think there's also a thing in heterosexual depictions of lesbian and gay relationships where it's okay to include them, but you have to kill them off in the end, and it still happens, you know. So if you look at something like Happy Valley, not Happy Valley, Last Tango in Halifax, I was raging mad when the gorgeous, names just come right out of my head, blonde, fabulous actress, played the fabulous headmistress, who we would all love addressing. Yes, when her partner was killed. And that, to me, is quite typical. Now, I think Sally Wainwright deeply regrets doing that. But what do you think, from contacts you have with younger gay people, about whether it is actually getting more difficult again to be gay? What's your thoughts on that, and what their coming out experiences have been like? Anyone?
I think I take who I think you said, Rhona, you resist anyone talking about gay children, because obviously your sexuality can't emerge until you understand your own sexuality, which obviously happens with sexual awakening, and that happens at a different age for everyone. But I was very shocked. My nephew goes to school still with 2,000 kids, and there was, when I asked him 2 years ago, there was not one openly gay boy, the boys' school. Now, obviously, a lot of them are of an age where they haven't yet emerged into sexuality, but that goes up to 18. And it really surprised me. I thought, you know, it's a good school as well, where, you know, you might expect prejudices to have been dissolved, but and you know, other children. My niece had some trouble. Not that she knows what her sexuality is, but just a sense that at the very liberal school that she went to, that, you know, it wasn't cool. And I find that very surprising, because I think one of the most exciting things about, one of the things that sort of silver linings about being gay, is that you're different, and it's quite exciting being different, and it makes you stand out. And I wonder why, if that's been lost, it has been lost and been replaced by, in some areas, and I've seen this in my straight friends, straight children, a desire to identify as non-binary, which seems to be the cool thing to be, maybe because it's similar, you feel different and what have you. But I don't know. It's hard. I mean, maybe we should follow this up with a session with young gay people to talk about their coming out stories and how different they would be.
Yeah, if we can get young gay people to participate, and we'll come back to that, but one of the things I'm aware of is how damn difficult it is now for young gay people to speak about being same-sex attracted, because they have jobs to lose and friends to lose and kudos to lose. But Charlotte, Kate, if you get anything you think about what it's like for young gay people coming out, on you go, Charlotte.
Yeah, thanks, Rhona. It's quite interesting because, you know, Liz and I don't have children of our own, but obviously we've got lots of friends with children, and it's quite interesting because we've seen these children grow up from little wee ones. And relatively recently, we were guests with some friends, and the daughter introduced her friend to us as she introduced her, and the parents then said that this was her girlfriend. She's now 21. Yeah. What was interesting was that the young girl who is our friend introduced her girlfriend, didn't say it was her girlfriend. I noticed a shyness and a self-consciousness. It was obviously a big deal for them. You know, this young girl's known as sort of most of her life. The parents then said, "Oh, that was daughter's girlfriend." And, oh, cool. And one of the things they said was, knowing you while they were all growing up, this is a real tight-knit, this is where we used to live, it's a real sort of village atmosphere. It was really nice, actually, because whilst they were little, and we all knew them from the age of 4 or 5, the parents would say it makes it okay for them, and some of them have grown up and are in same-sex relationships. So the parents are cool about it, they're relaxed, because that whole thing, if you're going to be sad for the rest of your life, they've realized, actually, maybe it's going to be okay. But the kids also have grown up knowing that. But what struck me was that still, and that's just a young person thing, I think, that shyness of saying I am or I'm not. And I think we don't want to force people into a bottleneck to say I'm this or I'm that. And I remember that, I said to Kate when we first got to know each other that, I haven't called myself a lesbian this much since I don't know when, and certainly when you're coming out, you don't, like Conrad said, you don't want to pigeonhole yourself. You're just feeling these things and you've got a nice relationship and that's that. And we don't want to pigeonhole people. But I do think, going back to what I was saying before, I think the excitement that we felt in that particular era with David Bowie, such an icon of you can dress and appear as you like, I'm still a man, and Annie Lennox, I'm still a woman. I think that's making it a murkier atmosphere. I think, as you say, it's not maybe so cool. I don't know why. I think that's one of the things we want to do. We want to try and help them rediscover that and say, this is great. Yeah. It's a great choice.
Yeah. I totally agree. It should be more about fun. I can remember when I found out I was going to Liverpool University, I used to buy Gay Times. And I remember, looking through everything alphabetically, looking at everything there was to do in Liverpool, getting my map and finding out where everything was. And there was such a sense of excitement that all that was coming up. And there was going to be so many people that I would meet and, all the fun. And it just seems to me that maybe partly as well because of COVID and lots of young people being stuck at home, that they don't have an expectation of a big social circle of people who it's going to be great to meet new people. It's almost as if they only want to meet people who are like themselves. And this, for me, it was just an opportunity to sort of hurl myself into this new world. And I couldn't wait. And what I used to do as well is, so I didn't have to tell people that I was gay, is I spent a very long time, my desk sort of faced my drawer, and I would position my copies of Gay Times that I bought sort of on the desk, not directly at the door, because that would just be too obvious, but just at the right angle so they could clock it and they could see. And I'd go, oh yes, I am gay. And, so they could mention it if they wanted to. But loads of people were interested who were straight as well, and they'd be like, "What's this?" And they'd look at it, "Are you gay?" And they'd ask, and they'd want to know about it, and there was a sense that maybe I was kind of a cool person to know, or little did they know. But at that point, they thought, yeah, this is a cool person, and that is really missing, isn't it, for young people now? It's we need to have more fun. More fun. I think that's the sort of conclusion of what it is about being gay. We need to have more fun, don't we?
And find your tribe.
Yeah. So we've only got a couple of minutes left. So in a minute, I'm going to come to all of you and ask you to sum up in a sentence or two the best thing about your gay life. What has been absolutely wonderful for you about being gay over these last decades or couple of hundred years or whatever it is. But just before I do that, I'm just going to say thank you so much to everybody that's joined us. Some great comments and questions in there. I'm glad there's been some resonance with what we've said with you. And if you want more of this stuff, let us know. It's been a fantastic hour. Thank you very much. But I'm really looking forward to Gardener's World. Okay, so I'm going to ask you all what's been the best thing about your big gay life. Okay, Conrad, off you go. A couple of sentences.
Just being different and free. I think being gay frees you from so much expectation, and you don't want there to be new expectation about being gay. And obviously, because that would be sort of pointless. I think for me, it was the awful trauma of understanding that you were gay. Is compensated for by understanding that you're free and you're different from everyone else. Something about that uniqueness, or at least you're a minority, a very small minority, which is really liberating.
Great. Charlotte, a couple of sentences from you, your big gay life.
Love is a liberation. Fear nothing. Be out and be proud.
Thank you. Kate Barker, Chief Executive of LGB Alliance, your big gay life has been?
Well, I think it's a little bit like Comrades in that you can really forge your own path. And the other thing was just like lots of sex, really, when I was younger, and that was great. That's probably the best bit. On that bombshell.
Okay, and I'll finish then by saying the best thing about my big gay life has been women, women, and more women. I love women. I love everything about them and love them in every way possible. I am totally same-sex attracted. I like men as friends, but other than that, no, thank you. And I'm sure that's the same for Conrad, for you, the other way, and
Well,
for
I
Charlotte.
didn't mention cock, sorry, which is one of
There you go. Well, we'll all say Fanny. And with that, good night to all of you. Thank you very much. We're counting down 3 seconds to go. 2, 1, bye.